there is a boy standing in a room that is on fire. Not metaphorically, literally. The walls of the chamber are lined with torches that burn with the deep, controlled orange of disciplined flame, and the floor beneath his feet is smooth stone that has absorbed the heat of 1,000 previous duels. He is 13 years old. His hands are at his sides. He is not moving. And across from him, in the same chamber, in the same firelight, stands his father. His father, who is the most powerful man in the world. His father, who summoned him here. His father, who intends to burn him. This is where Prince Zuko's story begins. Not with a quest, not with a mission, not with a declaration of war or a moment of defiance or some grand heroic choice. It begins here, in silence, in a room full of fire, with a boy who has already lost before the duel even starts. And everything that happens across 3 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender, every choice Zuko makes, every wrong turn, every moment where he almost becomes who he was meant to be and then doesn't, every moment where he finally does, all of it traces back to this room, to this fire, to this particular silence. So tonight we are going to follow him, not through the action, not through the fights, though we will talk about those. We are going to follow the philosophy. The ideas that move underneath Zuko's story like deep water under ice, invisible from the surface, but responsible for everything you feel when you watch him. We are going to look at what the show is actually saying about honor, about identity, about the masks people wear and the cost of wearing them, about the moment when someone who has spent their whole life running in the wrong direction finally stops and turns around. This is a long journey. It always has been. So settle in, get comfortable, let the weight of the day go. And let us begin at the beginning, in the room that changed everything, with the boy who was burned. If you have made it this far and you are watching from somewhere quiet, I want to know where you are. Drop a comment telling me the time and the place you are watching from. And if this kind of long, slow storytelling is what you come here for, subscribing makes sure you never miss it. Now let us go back to the fire. Part 1. The Boy Who Was Burned. The story of Zuko's scar is one of the most devastating origin stories in the history of animated television, and what makes it devastating is not the violence. It is the context. In the 12th episode of the first season, an episode called The Storm, the show finally tells you how Prince Zuko came to have a burn covering the left side of his face. The story is told by Uncle Iroh, quietly, to the crew of Zuko's ship, and as Iroh speaks in the present, the animation takes you back into the past. Into a war council, into a room full of generals and admirals and Fire Nation military commanders gathered around a table to plan an offensive, and at the edge of that table, almost invisible, almost not supposed to be there, a 13-year-old boy. Zuko had asked his uncle Iroh if he could attend the council. He was eager. He was young. He wanted to understand the war his nation was fighting, wanted to be part of the serious conversations that shaped the Fire Nation's future. Iroh agreed but warned him to stay silent, to observe, to not draw attention to himself. He could not do it. The general at the table presented a plan. He proposed using a division of raw recruits, inexperienced Fire Nation soldiers barely older than Zuko himself, as bait. The plan was to draw out a dangerous Earth Kingdom general by sacrificing these young soldiers, luring the enemy into a trap at the cost of the lives of the very men the plan was supposed to protect. The other commanders at the table considered it, weighed it, said nothing. Zuko spoke out. He said it was wrong. He said those soldiers had families. He said you could not simply throw lives away as tactical gambits. He said what anyone with a working moral compass would say, and he said it in a room full of people who had long since learned not to say it. The general whose plan Zuko had just publicly challenged demanded satisfaction. He demanded an Agni Kai, a fire duel. In Fire Nation culture, the Agni Kai is the mechanism by which honor is settled, by which disputes between firebenders are resolved through combat. The challenge party fights the challenger. Zuko agreed. He was 13 and afraid and proud, and he agreed. He walked into the Agni Kai chamber prepared to fight the general. But the general was not there. His father was. By speaking out in the general's presence, Zuko had technically disrespected not just the general but the Fire Lord's War Council, which meant that in the Fire Nation's legal logic, it was Ozai himself who had been challenged. And so Ozai came to fight. And Zuko, standing across from his own father, did what any child standing across from a parent they love and fear in equal measure would do. He dropped to his knees. He pressed his forehead to the floor. He begged. He told his father he was sorry. He told his father he had not meant to cause offense. He said he was his loyal son. He said he would accept whatever punishment Ozai deemed appropriate. He said, everything you say when you are 13 years old and you are terrified and you still believe that love can be earned by making yourself small enough. Ozai called this weakness. And then he burned him. The show does not show you the moment of burning directly. It cuts away to Iroh watching, and Iroh's face does something extraordinary. He does not look angry. He does not look horrified in the way you would look horrified watching a stranger suffer. He looks away. He turns his head. And in turning away, his expression communicates something that no dialogue could. This is a man watching a thing he could not stop. In a moment he will carry for the rest of his life. Ozai burned the left side of his son's face, leaving a mark that covered his eye and stretched across his cheek. And then he banished him. He told Zuko that the only way back, the only way to restore his honor and return to the Fire Nation was to capture the Avatar, a being that had not been seen in 100 years and that most of the world assumed was dead. He gave his son an impossible task and a burned face and sent him out into the world. Now, stop for a moment, because before we go any further into what happens to Zuko, we need to sit with what the show is actually telling us in this scene. Because it is not simply telling us that Ozai is cruel, though he is. It is telling us something much more complicated about the relationship between love and power, and about what happens to a person when those two things get tangled together in ways that can never quite be separated. Zuko spoke out at that council because he was right. He was morally correct. The plan was wrong. The sacrifice of those soldiers served strategy but not humanity, and Zuko, young as he was, could feel the difference. That moral instinct was the best thing about him. It was the seed of everything he would eventually become, and the response to that moral instinct was a burn that he would wear for the rest of his life. The world punished him for being good. Not just punished him, marked him. The scar is visible. It is the first thing anyone sees when they look at Prince Zuko. Before they know his name, before they know his story, before they know that he was once a boy who tried to protect strangers in a war room, they see the burned side of his face. And the world, which does not know the context, draws its conclusions accordingly. He looks like a villain. He is framed like a villain. He is introduced to the audience as an antagonist because his father made him look like one. This is the philosophical bedrock of everything that follows. Zuko's entire journey across 3 seasons is, at its core, a question of whether a person can shed the identity that someone else imposed on them through violence and find the one that was there underneath all along. Whether the boy who tried to protect those soldiers in that war room, the boy who got on his knees because he still believed in love, is still in there somewhere beneath the scar and the rage and the years of chasing a dream that was never his. The answer the show gives, slowly and painfully, is yes. He is still there. He was always there. But getting back to him costs everything. There is something in the show's construction of this scene that deserves particular attention, which is the fact that Zuko did not fight back. He could have. He was a trained firebender. He was not powerless. He knelt because he could not make himself raise a hand against his own father, could not bring himself to fight the man he most wanted love from. And Ozai, who understood power in the only way he knew how, interpreted this as weakness rather than as the most natural and heartbreaking thing a child can do. This misreading is not accidental. It is the first and most fundamental of the many misreadings that define their relationship. Ozai looked at his son's inability to fight his own father and saw a coward. What was actually there was a child who loved his father too much to hurt him. And Ozai, whose entire worldview was organized around the idea that love is a liability, around the idea that compassion is weakness, and that power is the only real currency, had no framework for understanding this. He did not see a boy who was too loving. He saw a boy who was too soft, so he tried to fix him with fire. The scar, then, is not just a symbol of cruelty. It is a symbol of a fundamental and catastrophic misunderstanding between a father and a son. It is Ozai's correction written on Zuko's face. His attempt to remake his child in his own image, to burn out what he saw as weakness and leave something harder, something capable of the ruthlessness that Ozai believed the world required. What he did not understand, what the entire show is about demonstrating, is that the weakness he was trying to burn out was not weakness at all. It was the best part of Zuko. And you cannot burn out the best part of someone. You can only push it underground, make it go quiet, make it hide. But it does not disappear. It waits, patient as water under rock, waiting for the moment when it can finally surface again. The show also does something very specific with the geography of Zuko's scar that rewards attention. The scar is on his left side, over his left eye. In many cultural traditions, the left side of the body is associated with the heart, with the feminine, with the intuitive and the emotional. The right side is associated with action, with the rational, with what is projected outward to the world. Ozai burned the side of Zuko's face that was closest to his heart. He tried to scar the part of his son that felt things too deeply. The part that spoke out of turn because it could not watch soldiers be sacrificed without saying something. And the show's storyboard artists, as noted in the reference transcript at the start of this video, use the scar as a deliberate framing tool throughout all 3 seasons. When Zuko is operating from shame and anger, from his worst impulses, from the identity his father tried to impose, the camera frames him from the scarred side. When he is showing vulnerability, growth, the quiet version of himself that is still trying to be good, the camera shows the unscarred side. The visual language of the show is constantly asking you to pay attention to which Zuko you are looking at, the one his father made or the one that was always there underneath. This detail is the kind of thing that you absorb without knowing you have absorbed it. You watch 3 seasons of this boy and you feel the difference between scenes in ways you cannot quite articulate, feel a shift in how you relate to him depending on which side of his face the camera chooses. And the reason you feel it is that someone was deliberate about it. Someone made the choice, scene by scene, episode by episode, to use the geography of this character's face to tell you the story of his soul. Let us talk about what banishment means, because that is the other half of what Ozai did that day. The scar was physical. The banishment was existential. Zuko was born a prince of the Fire Nation, born into the most powerful dynasty in the world at the height of that dynasty's power. He had a home, a title, a clear path, a place in the order of things. His identity was not something he had constructed. It had been constructed for him, assembled around him by birth and blood and the expectations of a nation. He was the crown prince. He knew who he was because the world told him. He looked at the world and the world looked back and said, "You are this," and Zuko, like most children, believed it. Then his father took it all away. He did not just lose his home, he lost his context. He lost the framework through which he had understood himself. He was sent out into a world that had no place for a banished Fire Nation prince, carrying a mission that was designed to be impossible and a face that ensured everyone he met would see the Fire Nation and its cruelty before they saw anything else. He was, from the moment of that banishment, a person without a definition. And the question of how he would fill that void, what he would pour into the empty space where his identity had been, is the question that drives the entire show. The answer he reaches for first, the one that seems most obvious, the one that his father handed him along with the impossible mission, is honor. And that brings us to the second part of what makes Zuko's story so philosophically rich. Because honor, in the way Zuko initially understands it, is not actually a virtue, it is a need in disguise. And understanding the difference between those two things is what the next 3 seasons are all about. Part 2, The Philosophy of Honor. The word honor appears more in the first season of Avatar: The Last Airbender than almost any other word. It comes out of Zuko's mouth the way other words come out of other people, like a reflex, like a verbal tick, like something so deeply embedded in the way he processes the world that he cannot think a complete thought without it. My honor. Restore my honor. I will capture the Avatar and restore my honor. Without honor, what am I? Honor above all else. Honor is everything. And the first time you watch the show, especially if you are young, you might take this at face value. Honor sounds like a noble thing to care about. It sounds like integrity, like principle, like the kind of value that a character worth following should hold dear. But the show is more careful than that. Much more careful. Because the way Zuko uses the word honor in the first season reveals that he does not actually mean honor in any philosophical or ethical sense at all. When Zuko says honor, what he means is acceptance. What he means is love. What he means, most specifically, is his father's approval. The honor he is chasing is not earned through virtuous action. It cannot be. You do not earn honor by capturing a child and dragging him back to your father as a trophy. You do not restore your moral standing by doing whatever it takes to win, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. The things Zuko does in the first season in the name of honor are not honorable. They are desperate. They are the actions of a boy who has been told that the only way back to where he belongs is to succeed at a task his father set, and who has confused that task with genuine moral worth. This is one of the most psychologically precise things the show does, and it does it quietly, without ever pointing at it and saying, "Look at this theme I am exploring." It simply shows you a boy who is in terrible pain, and who has organized that pain around a word that makes the pain feel meaningful and legitimate, and it lets you sit with the slow realization that the word is hollow. That honor, as Zuko defines it, is not a virtue. It is an addiction. He is chasing approval the way someone else might chase any other thing they have been told will fill the void at the center of their life. The philosophy here draws directly from Confucian ethics, which is one of the primary philosophical traditions woven into Avatar's world. Confucianism places enormous emphasis on relationships, on the obligations that flow between people based on their roles, on the idea that virtue is expressed through how you fulfill your duties to others, particularly your duties to parents. In the Confucian framework, filial piety, the respect and devotion owed to a parent, is one of the foundational virtues. It is the root from which all other virtues grow. Zuko has internalized this, completely, uncritically. His entire value system is organized around the idea that his father's approval is the measure of his worth. That to be a good son is to give Ozai what Ozai wants. That filial piety, in its most surface-level expression, is the highest moral calling. What the show is doing, across 3 seasons, is showing you what happens when this framework collides with reality, when the parent whose approval you have organized your entire life around is not a source of wisdom but of damage, when the relationship you have built your identity around is not nurturing but exploitative, when the virtue you thought you were expressing is actually just a disguise for a wound that has never been allowed to heal. In Confucian philosophy, this is a genuine tension that the tradition has wrestled with for centuries. What do you owe a parent who is not worthy of the devotion they demand? What does filial piety look like when the parent is cruel? The Analects of Confucius are more nuanced on this point than most people realize. Confucius himself suggested that remonstrance, respectful but honest pushback, was sometimes the truest form of filial devotion. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a parent is to refuse to enable their worst impulses. Zuko will eventually arrive at this understanding, but not for a very long time. And the journey to that understanding is painful, precisely because he starts from such a deep conviction that his father's love is the thing he most needs, and such a complete inability to see that his father is not capable of giving it. The other philosophical dimension of honor in the show is its relationship to external validation versus internal integrity. This is a distinction that goes back at least as far as Aristotle, who differentiated between external goods, things like reputation, status, and recognition, and internal goods, things like virtue, wisdom, and genuine flourishing. Aristotle argued that a life organized around the pursuit of external goods, while it might produce appearances of success, ultimately fails to satisfy, because external goods are always contingent, always dependent on what other people think and do, always subject to being taken away. Zuko's honor is entirely external in this sense. It lives in his father's eyes. It depends on what Ozai says. It can be revoked by a decree. It can be restored by a performance. It is not, at any point in the first season, something that Zuko has examined for himself, something he has decided he actually believes in. He has simply been told that he lost it and that he needs to get it back, and he has accepted this framing completely because he was 13 years old and in pain and his father told him. The show plants the seeds of a different understanding of honor very early, in small moments that are easy to miss on a first viewing. The most important of these is in The Storm, the same episode where we learn about the Agni Kai. After learning what Zuko did at that war council, the thing that got him burned and banished, you realize that the act itself was deeply honorable. He stood up for soldiers who could not speak for themselves. He spoke truth to power in a room where truth was not welcome. He did the thing that his moral instincts demanded, even though the cost was enormous. That was honor. Real honor. Not the kind that gets you invited back to the palace. The kind that costs you something. And the show does this deliberately. It shows you what genuine honor looks like, the kind Zuko is actually capable of. At the exact same moment it shows you the event that set him on the path of chasing a false version of it. The juxtaposition is the lesson. Zuko has always known what honor actually is. He demonstrated it at 13 years old in front of a room full of generals. He just does not know that he knows. Because the person who should have told him, who should have said, "Son, what you did today was brave and true, and I am proud of you," that person burned him instead. There is also something important in how the show handles the word as Zuko grows. If you track it carefully across all 3 seasons, honor appears less and less frequently as the series progresses. In the first season, it is constant. In the second season, it appears but with increasing uncertainty, as if Zuko is beginning to sense that the word does not hold the meaning he thought it did. By the third season, Zuko barely uses it at all. Not because he has abandoned the concept, but because he has grown past needing the word. He has integrated the real thing, internalized it, made it part of who he is rather than something he is trying to catch. The moment this is made explicit comes in the third season, when Zuko is finally talking to his father in the underground bunker during the day of Black Sunday. He says something that lands like a stone dropped into still water. He says that he thought he lost his honor, and that somehow his father could give it back to him. But he knows now that no one can give you your honor. It is something you earn for yourself by choosing to do what is right. This is not just a nice line. It is the philosophical resolution of his entire arc. It is the moment when the external conception of honor collapses completely, and the internal one emerges in its place. He is not asking his father for anything anymore. He is not performing for anyone anymore. He is simply telling the truth about what he has learned, in a room where the truth has always been forbidden, and he is doing it with a steadiness that Ozai, for all his power, cannot match. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We need to go back to the middle of the journey, to the part where Zuko is neither the angry boy of the first season nor the clear-eyed young man of the third, but something harder, something caught between two selves in the way that is the most human and the most difficult place a person can occupy. We need to talk about the mask. Part 3. The Mask and the Blue Spirit. There is an episode in the first season called The Blue Spirit, and if you have seen it, you know it is one of the most quietly important episodes in the entire series. Not because of the action, though the action is excellent, but because of what happens in the 2 minutes after the action ends. Here's what happens in the episode. Aang has been captured by Admiral Zhao, one of the Fire Nation's more brutal military commanders, and imprisoned in a fortress. Zuko learns about this and makes a decision that, on the surface, makes no sense. He puts on a mask, a theatrical Chinese opera mask painted blue and white with bold black lines, and he infiltrates the fortress and rescues Aang himself. Not because he wants to help Aang, because he wants to capture Aang, and he cannot do that if Zhao has him first. He is not being good, he is being strategic. Or at least, that is the part of the story he is telling himself. The escape works, but barely. Zuko and Aang make it out, but during the final run, Zuko is knocked unconscious. Aang could leave him there. He has every reason to. This boy has been chasing him across the entire world, has tried to capture him multiple times, has made his life enormously difficult. Leaving him is the sensible thing. Aang does not leave him. He drags Zuko to safety, sits beside him while he waits for Zuko to wake up, and in the quiet of that waiting, starts to talk. He tells Zuko about a friend he had 100 years ago, before the war, a boy from the Fire Nation named Kuzan who was one of the best friends he had ever known. And then Aang asks a question. He asks whether, if they had known each other back then, before all of this, before the war and the banishment and the scar and the chase, they could have been friends. Zuko wakes up at some point during this. He lies there and listens. And then he stands up and he blasts fire at Aang and walks away. The moment is devastating precisely because of what it contains. Aang just offered him something. Not just friendship in the abstract, but a different way of seeing him. He looked at the boy in the blue mask, the boy who had just risked his life on what appeared to be a rescue, and he imagined a version of the world where this person was just a person, not an enemy, not an antagonist, not someone defined by the war. And he offered that version of the world to Zuko, quietly, without ceremony, the way you offer someone something when you genuinely mean it. Zuko's response is to attack, but watch his face before he does. Just for a second, the animation gives you a brief moment where Zuko's face is doing something complicated. He is not looking at Aang with contempt. He is not looking at him with anger. He is looking at him with something that is very close to longing. And then the wall comes back up and he does what he always does and he chooses fire over feeling. The Blue Spirit mask is one of the show's richest symbols, and it works on several levels simultaneously. The first level is the most obvious. The mask allows Zuko to do something he cannot do as himself. As Prince Zuko, banished heir to the Fire Nation, every action is constrained by identity, by the role he is supposed to be playing in the story everyone around him is telling. But as the Blue Spirit, none of that applies. The Blue Spirit is anonymous. The Blue Spirit has no obligation to Ozai, no mission to complete, no honor to restore. The Blue Spirit can just act according to what feels right, which in this case means rescuing the Avatar from someone who does not deserve to have him. The second level is philosophical. The blue color of the mask is not accidental. The show draws from real Chinese opera tradition here, in which the color blue on a character's face represents stealth, cunning, and a particular kind of moral complexity that does not fall neatly on the side of good or evil. The Blue Spirit is not a hero, but he is not exactly a villain either. He is something in between, which is exactly where Zuko lives in the first season. Not good, but not purely bad. Capable of decent acts for complicated reasons. Morally ambiguous in a way that the masks of his official identity do not allow for. The third level is psychological. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the social mask that a person presents to the world, and the shadow, the part of the self that cannot be integrated into the persona, and so gets pushed down, hidden, denied. Jung believed that the shadow was not simply darkness but complexity, the parts of ourselves that do not fit the role we have been assigned. For Zuko, the Blue Spirit is his shadow. It is the part of him that the Fire Prince role cannot contain. The part that rescues instead of captures, that feels protective toward a child who should be his enemy, that responds to loneliness and isolation with a kind of desperate reaching toward connection that the official persona would never permit. The tragedy of the Blue Spirit episode, and the reason it resonates so deeply, is that in the mask Zuko is briefly free. He is not the banished prince. He is not his father's failure. He is just a person moving through the night, doing something that feels right, something that connects him for a few hours to another person in a way that is genuine and immediate and uncomplicated by history. And then the mask comes off, and the wall goes back up, and he attacks and walks away, and the loneliness closes in again like water filling a hole. Aang's question, that quiet hypothetical, "Do you think we could have been friends?" is one of the most heartbreaking lines in the show. Not because of what Zuko says in response, which is nothing, but because of how clearly the show answers it on his behalf across the following 2 seasons. Yes, of course they could have been friends. They were, in the world of that one night, something very close to it, and Zuko could not let himself have it, because to accept friendship from the Avatar would mean redefining everything he understood about who he was supposed to be. He was not ready to do that yet. Not even close. But the Blue Spirit does not disappear. The mask gets left behind, but the person who wore it, the version of Zuko who is capable of crossing enemy lines for reasons he cannot quite explain, who can listen to a child talk about longing for old friends and feel the weight of it rather than the strategic opportunity, that person does not go away. He just goes back underground, and the underground is where we need to go next. Because the second season of Avatar is the most philosophically complex part of Zuko's story, the period when all the contradictions in him are most raw and most visible, when he is closest to who he actually is and most desperate to deny it. In the second season, Zuko and Iroh are refugees. They have abandoned the Fire Nation ship, they have cut off their top knots. They are moving through the Earth Kingdom under assumed identities, no longer prince and general but just 2 men without a place, trying to survive in a world that has no particular interest in their survival. And this stripping away of everything, the title, the mission, the armor of official identity, is where the most interesting things start to happen. Because without the frame of being a Fire Nation prince, Zuko has to confront a question he has never been asked before. Not who are you supposed to be, but who are you? This is a harder question than it sounds. Most of us never have to answer it from scratch. We build our sense of self incrementally, layer by layer, in the context of family and community and the ongoing feedback of other people's expectations. We know who we are partly because the people around us keep reflecting it back to us, confirming it, reinforcing it. Take all of that away, drop a person into a world where no one knows their name or their story, and the question gets terrifying. Zuko's answer, initially, is to keep reaching for the old identity, to find ways to make himself Fire Nation even when he has no Fire Nation to belong to keep framing everything in terms of the mission, the honor, the father's approval, even when all 3 are explicitly unavailable to him in the refugee life he is now living. But something else is happening underneath that, something quieter and harder to admit. He is, for the first time, living like a normal person. He is working. He is dealing with ordinary problems: how to make enough money, how to find food, how to navigate a world where no one owes you anything. He is, in a community of other people who are also just trying to survive, beginning to develop the kind of practical empathy that you can only really develop when your own comfort is not guaranteed. This is the soil in which his real self begins to grow. Not in a palace, not on a warship, in a refugee settlement in the outer ring of Ba Sing Se, washing dishes in a tea shop, wearing the plain clothes of a commoner. The stripping away of everything external was not just punishment. It was preparation. It was the slow process of removing every layer of performed identity until there was nothing left but the person underneath. And the person underneath, it turns out, was the boy who had always been there, the one who spoke out in the war council, the one who lay beside Aang in the forest and felt the weight of his question rather than the opportunity it represented. The one who, time and again, when given a choice between something that felt right and something that served the mission, kept choosing something that felt right and then couldn't understand why the mission kept slipping away. Before we can talk about what happens when that person finally comes to the surface, we need to talk about the single most important relationship in Zuko's entire story. We need to talk about his uncle. Part 4: Iroh and the Way of Tea. Uncle Iroh is, depending on how you count these things, either the wisest character in Avatar: The Last Airbender or the second wisest. What makes him interesting is not just that he is wise, but how he is wise, and what his wisdom looks like from the outside before you understand what it is. When Iroh is first introduced, he appears to be nearly everything Zuko is not. Where Zuko is urgent, Iroh is relaxed. Where Zuko is consuming himself with the mission, Iroh is playing tile games and drinking tea and composing bad poetry and generally behaving like a man who has forgotten that there is a war on. He appears, especially in the early episodes, to be a cheerful and slightly ridiculous old man who is content to follow his nephew around the world while doing nothing particularly useful. This is, of course, exactly what he wants you to think. There is a concept in Taoist philosophy called Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-action or effortless action. It does not mean doing nothing. It means doing things in the way that is so aligned with the natural flow of events that it does not feel like effort, so integrated into the situation that it does not create resistance. A river does not force its way to the sea, it flows. It finds the path of least resistance. It shapes the stone not through aggression but through patient, constant presence. Iroh moves through the world like this. He does not push. He does not lecture. He does not confront Zuko's choices directly, at least not usually. He simply exists beside him, consistently, warmly, tea in hand, offering small observations that are easy to ignore and impossible to forget. He plants seeds and he waits. He trusts the natural growth of things more than he trusts any plan he could impose on them. The philosopher Zhuangzi, whose writing is one of the foundational texts of Taoism, described this approach to wisdom and influence in terms of a craftsman or an artist who has become so skilled at what they do that the skill itself has become invisible. The true sage, in the Zhuangzian tradition, does not announce their wisdom. They embody it. They live it so completely that people who spend time with them are changed without quite knowing why, without having attended any lectures or received any formal instruction. The sage is the water that shapes the stone. Patient, consistent, always there. Iroh is this, and the show is extremely careful about when and how he chooses to speak directly. One of the most important scholarly analyses of Iroh's character, written by philosopher Erich Schwitzgebel and published as an academic study, notes that Iroh's approach changes throughout the series in direct proportion to Zuko's readiness to hear him. In the early episodes, when Zuko is most closed, Iroh barely tries to teach directly. He jokes, he fusses about tea, he appears harmless and slightly foolish. He is, in the language of Zhuangzi, singing only when he is getting through. When Zuko begins to crack open, when the certainty starts to falter, Iroh's words become more direct, not because he suddenly decides to lecture, but because the soil has changed. What was stone is now beginning to become capable of absorbing water. Iroh's own backstory is essential to understanding why he is who he is. He was not always the gentle tea-obsessed philosopher of the series. He was, before we meet him, one of the most feared and formidable generals in the Fire Nation's history. He led a siege of Ba Sing Se that lasted 600 days. He was known as the Dragon of the West, a title earned through military conquest and the kind of ruthlessness that Fire Nation military achievement required. He was, in the language of his nation, everything Zuko is supposed to aspire to become. And then his son, Lu Ten, died in battle. The death of Lu Ten is the hinge on which Iroh's entire life turned. He had been laying siege to Ba Sing Se when the news arrived. He lifted the siege, abandoned the campaign, and in the years that followed underwent a transformation so complete that when he re-emerges in the story as Zuko's uncle, there is almost no trace of the general who once stood before those walls and waged war. He spent years traveling, studying, crossing borders that his nation regarded as enemy territory, learning from Water Tribe healers and Earth Kingdom philosophers, and every tradition that the Fire Nation's imperialism had tried to suppress or erase. He joined the Order of the White Lotus, a secret society of scholars and masters dedicated to the idea that wisdom belongs to no single nation, and he built his entire post-war philosophy around the recognition that his country, for all its power, had been deeply and profoundly wrong. He talks about this directly in the third season, in an achingly beautiful moment when he is alone in the underground shelter where the Order of the White Lotus has gathered. He speaks to the spirit of his dead son. He says he is sorry he could not protect him, but that he hopes he is proud of who he has become. This transformation, this radical willingness to look at everything he had believed in, everything that had given his life meaning and structure, and say, I was wrong, this needs to be different, is the template for what Zuko will eventually do. Iroh has already walked the road. He is not just a guide. He is proof that the road can be walked, that a person who has operated inside a system of power and cruelty and conquest can choose to step outside it, that the shedding of a poisoned identity, however painful, is survivable. More than survivable, it is the thing that makes a life worth living. When Iroh talks about tea, he is always talking about something else. This is not just a character quirk, it is philosophy compressed into image. Tea, in the traditions that Iroh embodies, is about patience, about the slow extraction of essence through sustained application of heat, about the value of small daily rituals that keep you tethered to the present when the present is hard. It is about the pleasures that money cannot buy and banishment cannot take away. It is about what remains when everything external has been stripped down. When Iroh makes tea in jail, he is making a statement. He is refusing to let incarceration rob him of the practices that sustain him. He is insisting that the simple human act of taking care of yourself and offering warmth to others persists regardless of circumstance. He is, in a tiny tin cup in a prison cell, expressing a philosophy of radical inner freedom. And Zuko watches all of this. For 3 seasons he watches this man refuse to be diminished by anything the world does to him. He watches his uncle find joy in a cup of tea in a refugee camp, find warmth in conversation with strangers, find peace in circumstances that would destroy someone who depended on external validation for their sense of worth. And slowly, the lesson seeps in, the way water seeps into stone. Not all at once, not consciously, but in the way that sustained proximity to genuine wisdom always works. The relationship between Zuko and Iroh is, philosophically speaking, a study in what Iroh himself calls the most important kind of love, which is the kind that holds on without holding tight. Iroh loves Zuko completely and without condition. He does not withdraw that love when Zuko makes terrible choices. He does not punish him with coldness or disappointment when Zuko chooses wrong. He expresses his disagreement, clearly and directly when necessary, and then he remains. He is still there, still warm, still making tea. This is, for Zuko, the most disorienting thing about his uncle. He has no framework for love that does not come with conditions attached. His father's love, or what he believed was his father's love, was entirely conditional on performance, on success, on being what Ozai wanted him to be. He has never experienced love as something that simply persists regardless of whether you earn it. And when he encounters it in Iroh, he does not know what to do with it. He resists it. He dismisses it. He sometimes treats Iroh with open contempt, calls him lazy and jealous and useless, and Iroh absorbs this and remains. He tries to push Iroh away, and Iroh does not go away. He makes the worst choice of his life, the choice we are about to discuss, and Iroh, when he has had time to grieve, forgives him. This is what unconditional love looks like in practice. Not passive, not without pain, but consistent, present, there regardless of what you have done or failed to do. And it is ultimately this love more than any single lesson or speech or moment of wisdom that saves Zuko, not because it solves his problems, but because it gives him a different model, a proof of concept that he can hold on to when everything else is uncertain, proof that it is possible to be loved for who you are rather than for what you can give someone. But before Zuko can fully receive this love, he has to do the thing that, of all the things he does across 3 seasons, is the hardest to watch. He has to betray it. Part 5, The Cave of Two Choices. The second season of Avatar: The Last Airbender ends with Zuko making the worst decision of his life. And the show makes it worse by first making you believe he might not. By the end of the second season, Zuko and Iroh have built a life in Ba Sing Se. They are working at a tea shop, a place called the Pow Family Tea House. And Iroh has found something there that he has not had in a long time. He has found happiness. Simple, uncomplicated, daily happiness in making tea for strangers and being recognized for doing it well. And watching his uncle be genuinely content for the first time, something happens in Zuko. The tension around his eyes relaxes slightly. He stops talking about honor. He begins, cautiously, quietly, to be at peace. Then Azula arrives. His sister Azula is, in many ways, Zuko's dark mirror, the version of him that Ozai succeeded in making. She is extraordinarily talented, utterly ruthless, completely loyal to her father's vision, and deeply, catastrophically unwell in ways that the show will make explicit later but that are already visible in how she moves through the world. She does not care about people. She cares about outcomes. She treats relationships as instruments. She is everything that Ozai's parenting was designed to produce, and seeing her is always, for Zuko, a reminder of the road he might have taken and still sometimes considers. Azula traps Zuko and Katara in a cavern beneath Ba Sing Se, a place lit by glowing green crystals, and then she comes to Zuko with an offer. Come back, fight with her, help take Ba Sing Se. And at the end of it, he can have everything his father said would be waiting when he succeeded. His honor, his place, his home. Iroh finds them in the cave and tells Zuko directly, something he rarely does. He tells him that Azula always lies, that what she is offering is not real redemption. He tells him that this is a moment of choice, a genuine crossroads, and he begs him, without words but with his whole face, to choose correctly. For a moment, in the cave, it looks like Zuko might, and then he does not. He fights alongside Azula against Aang and Katara. He helps take Ba Sing Se. He helps Azula put Aang down, the most catastrophic act in the entire series, the moment that nearly breaks the cycle. And in doing it, he betrays the person who has loved him most consistently and without condition. Iroh does not lecture him afterward. Iroh does not rage or punish. He says, in prison, with sadness rather than anger, that this was not the way. And he breaks. The betrayal in the cave is where Zuko's story becomes genuinely about something, philosophically speaking. Because up until this point, you could construct a reading of his arc as a fairly conventional story of a villain slowly becoming good. He makes bad choices, but there are always extenuating circumstances, always the pressure of the mission and the father and the scar and the banishment. You could argue that he has not really had a chance to choose, that the system around him is so constraining that his bad choices are almost inevitable. The cave takes that argument away. In the cave, he has the chance. Iroh has laid it out for him. The door is open. All he has to do is walk through it. And he does not. This is what makes the eventual redemption so powerful. The show does not let Zuko off the hook. It makes him responsible. It shows you the moment when he could have chosen differently and chose wrong anyway, makes you sit with that, and then asks you to believe that a person who made that choice can still find their way back. The psychological truth the show is navigating here is the concept of what we might call a relapse. Not in the clinical sense, but in the broader sense in which any person who is in the process of changing can find themselves suddenly reaching for the old familiar patterns when the pressure gets high enough. Zuko has been slowly, uncertainly moving towards something better across the entire second season. But when the moment of maximum pressure arrived, when Azula was there with the old promise, the old prize, the old framework of identity, his nervous system reverted. He grabbed the familiar thing because the familiar thing was what he knew how to hold, even when the familiar thing was poison. The show is not excusing this. It is explaining it. There is an enormous difference. The consequence is devastating. He gets what he wanted. He goes back. He is the crown prince again, welcomed home, received as a hero, given the title and the palace, and the nominal approval of a father who never intended to love him. And it is empty. Completely, utterly empty. He cannot sleep. He cannot eat comfortably. He sits in the palace and he knows, in the bones of him, that something is profoundly wrong. Not with the palace, not with the circumstances, with him. He dreamed of returning home for 3 years. He organized his entire life around that return, sacrificed his relationship with his uncle for it, made the worst choice he had ever made to get back to it. And now he is here. And it is nothing. This emptiness is the beginning of the real transformation. Not the cave. The cave was a step backward. The emptiness afterward is the first genuine step forward, because it is the first time in the series that Zuko has evidence he cannot ignore that the thing he has been chasing was never going to give him what he needed. He is in the palace. He has the honor, such as it is. He has his father's conditional approval for the moment. He has everything the mission promised. And he is miserable. This misery is a gift, though it does not feel like one. It is the crack through which the light gets in. Part 6. Anger as a wound. We need to talk about Zuko's anger, because his anger is the most misunderstood aspect of his character, and understanding it correctly changes everything about how you read the show. The first time most people encounter Zuko, they see a furious teenager who shouts about honor and throws fire at a 12-year-old boy. The anger reads as villainy. It reads as the heat of antagonism, the fiery personality of a character designed to be an obstacle. And on a surface reading, this is not wrong. He is angry, the anger is loud, the anger fills rooms. But the show is always asking you to look underneath the anger. Because underneath the anger is not evil. Underneath the anger is a child in tremendous pain who has no language for that pain other than fire. This is a very specific and very real psychological phenomenon. In clinical terms, it is called affect dysregulation, the inability to manage emotional states in a way that is proportionate to the situation. In common terms, it is what happens when a person has never been given the tools to process their emotional experience in ways that do not overflow into the people around them. When they have been taught, explicitly or by example, that feelings are weakness and that the appropriate response to any feeling is aggression. Zuko was taught this by a father who burned him for crying. Think about what that means. To literally have fire applied to your face because you showed vulnerability, because you knelt and asked for forgiveness and could not make yourself fight the person you loved. The lesson is written permanently on his body. Vulnerability costs you, softness costs you. Feeling things, especially the tender things, puts you in danger. Of course he is angry. Anger is the only emotion in his available vocabulary that does not make him feel exposed. It is the emotion that looks most like strength in the world he was raised in. It is the emotion that his father's example modeled as appropriate, as powerful, as the correct mode of engagement with a world that will hurt you if you let it. He is not angry because he is bad. He is angry because anger is the armor he assembled to keep from getting hurt again, and he has been wearing it so long he has forgotten it is armor and not skin. The show understands the relationship between trauma and anger with unusual sophistication. Zuko's rage is never random. It is always traceable, always connected to a wound that has not been allowed to heal. When he lashes out at Iroh, it is because Iroh's patience and gentleness make him feel the fullness of what he is missing, and that fullness is too painful to sit with directly, so it comes out sideways as contempt. When he lashes out at Aang, it is because Aang represents the thing Zuko needs in order to feel worthy, and he cannot have it, and the inability to have it is intolerable. When he is furious at Zhao, it is because Zhao says out loud what he is most afraid is true, that his father does not want him back, that he is a failure and a disgrace. The anger is always grief in disguise, always the emotion he cannot express in its true form, emerging as the only emotion that feels safe. There is a scene in the episode Zuko Alone, which is one of the most beautiful and devastating episodes in the series, where Zuko has been traveling through the Earth Kingdom by himself after separating from Iroh, and he ends up in a small rural village. There is a boy there named Lee, and Zuko befriends him, teaches him to fight, fixes his bracelet, eats dinner with his family, and for a brief and golden stretch of time, he is just a person. Not a prince, not a banished villain, not the Avatar's nemesis, just a quiet young man sitting at someone's kitchen table being treated with warmth and without agenda. And you can see him relax in a way you have almost never seen before. The fury goes out of his eyes like a lamp being turned down. He sits differently. He speaks differently. He is, in these quiet hours in a farmhouse kitchen, closer to who he actually is than at almost any other point in the series. Then soldiers come, then things escalate. Then Zuko reveals that he is Fire Nation and fights the soldiers and saves the boy. And the village looks at him with the same fear and suspicion they might look at any Fire Nation soldier, and the boy whose dinner table he shared will not meet his eyes. And Zuko walks away from the village alone. The episode ends there. No dialogue, no resolution. Just him walking away from the warmth he had almost allowed himself to feel, back into the cold that had been his companion since he was 13. This is the show at its best. No explanation, no narrator telling you what to think. Just an image of a person who got close enough to something good to know what he was missing, and who walked away from it because he still could not figure out how to be in it without it disappearing. The anger, in this episode and in everything that surrounds it, is finally visible as what it always was. Not a character flaw, not evidence of bad nature, but a shield. A very damaged, very heavy, very painful shield being carried by someone who was taught that putting it down would destroy him. The show also uses fire as a philosophical metaphor for Zuko's emotional state in ways that go deeper than simple symbolism. In the first season, Zuko's firebending is aggressive and expansive. It overflows. It lashes out. It is not controlled so much as barely contained, like a fire that has too much fuel and not enough vessel. As the series progresses and Zuko's internal state changes, his firebending changes too. By the third season, after he has made the choice to leave the Fire Nation and join Aang, his bending has become something different. Steadier, less explosive, more precise. He is using the same element, but the relationship with it has changed. Iroh says it directly in one of his most important conversations with Zuko. He says that firebending does not come from muscles or talent or aggression. He says it comes from the breath, from the most essential and fundamental act of living, the act of taking in air and releasing it, the act of being present in your body. Firebending, in Iroh's understanding, is not about projecting power outward. It is about channeling something that is already alive within you. This is a departure from how the Fire Nation as an institution teaches bending. The institutional teaching is about domination, about using fire to overwhelm, to destroy, to impose. And Zuko, who was trained in the institutional tradition, bends with that energy, with the need to conquer something, with the hunger to prove. What he needs to learn, and what he slowly does learn, is that fire can sustain as well as burn, that the element he wields is not inherently aggressive, that there is warmth in it as well as destruction, that the same force that his father used to scar him is the force that keeps families warm on winter nights, that lights the lanterns in the streets, that makes the tea his uncle loves so much. Fire is not evil, it is powerful. And powerful things are defined not by their nature but by the relationship of the person holding them to the question of why they are holding them at all. When Zuko finds his why, his fire changes. This is not a metaphor, it is literally shown in the animation. The quality of his flame shifts. The anger that was always there behind it begins to quiet, and what emerges in its place is something cleaner and more sustainable, more like a hearth fire than a weapon, more like a warm thing than a weapon. Part 7, The Long Walk Toward Good. Redemption, as it is usually portrayed in stories, happens in a moment. The villain has a change of heart. The switch flips. They do the heroic thing and the music swells, and they are transformed. The audience cheers. The story moves on. Zuko's redemption does not work like this. His redemption takes 3 seasons, dozens of episodes, multiple steps backward, at least one complete collapse, and an enormous amount of quiet suffering before it arrives. And the reason it is one of the most beloved character arcs in the history of television is precisely because it does not take the shortcut. It is patient with him in the way that genuine change requires patience. It refuses to rush, refuses to let him off the hook, refuses to pretend that becoming a better person is as simple as deciding to become one. There is a concept in moral philosophy called akrasia, which Aristotle described as weakness of will, the state of knowing what is right and failing to do it anyway. Not out of ignorance, not because you do not know better, but because the part of you that wants the wrong thing is stronger, in a given moment, than the part of you that knows better. Zuko's arc is essentially a sustained examination of Akrasia. He knows, in a deep intuitive sense, what is right, almost from the beginning. He knows the war is wrong. He knows his father's cruelty is wrong. He knows the Avatar should be free to do what the Avatar needs to do. The show gives you evidence of this knowledge throughout, in moments like the War Council speech, in the Blue Spirit, in Zuko alone. But knowing and doing are two different things, and the gap between them is where Zuko lives for most of the story. The third season begins with Zuko returned to the Fire Nation, celebrated, restored to his place, and it begins to close him down immediately. You can watch it happen in the early episodes. The open, searching quality of his face in the second season, that uncertainty which was painful but also alive, begins to disappear. He calcifies. He says the right things. He performs the role. He is the prince again, the crown prince, the heir apparent, and he is shrinking back into the shape his father made for him. He cannot sleep. This is not incidental. The sleeplessness is a symptom of the dissonance between the choice he made and the person he actually is. He is trying to be the version of himself that his father always wanted, and the effort is consuming him because that version is not real. It never was. Zuko's path back from the cave, back from the betrayal, is not a single dramatic reversal. It is a series of tiny, almost invisible steps in the right direction. He starts to question his teachers. He starts to notice when the Fire Nation's story about itself does not match what he knows about the world. He visits Iroh in prison and cannot do anything but stand there because he does not yet have the words. He begins, slowly, painfully, to assemble a new understanding of what he actually believes. The pivotal episode of the third season, perhaps the pivotal episode of the entire series, is the Day of Black Sunday. During the solar eclipse, when Fire Nation benders lose their power, Zuko goes to his father's hidden underground bunker alone. Not to fight. Not to prove anything. To tell the truth. He walks in and he says he is there to tell the truth. And Ozai, with his characteristic contempt, says that telling the truth during an eclipse should be interesting. And Zuko does it. He lays out, with clarity and without drama, everything he has figured out. He was taught, he says, that the Fire Nation was the greatest civilization in history, and that the war was sharing that greatness with the rest of the world. He says now that he understands what an incredible lie that was. He says that the people of the world are not in awe of the Fire Nation. They are terrified of it. They do not see greatness. They see something that needs to be stopped. He does not say this with anger. He says it with the steadiness of someone who has arrived at a conclusion after a very long journey and who no longer needs anyone else to confirm it. He is not asking his father to agree. He is not asking his father for anything. He is simply stating what is true. Ozai tries everything. He tries contempt. He tries manipulation. He tells Zuko the story of his mother, a story designed to destabilize, to make Zuko feel guilty, to redirect his clarity with emotional complication. He tries to talk until the eclipse ends and his power returns. And Zuko stands there. He listens. He processes. He says what needs to be said. And when the eclipse ends and Ozai launches lightning at his son with the intention of killing him, Zuko does something Iroh taught him. He redirects it. This is the scene where the lightning redirection technique becomes not a fighting skill but a philosophical statement. Iroh developed lightning redirection by studying waterbenders, by learning to flow with energy rather than resist it, to accept what comes and choose what to do with it rather than trying to stop it or match it with opposing force. The technique is, in physical terms, a demonstration of Taoist philosophy. You do not meet force with force. You receive it and redirect it. When Ozai fires lightning at Zuko, Zuko does not try to fight it or deflect it. He receives it, runs it through himself, and sends it back into the sky, into empty air, harming no one. He does not hurt his father. He does not try to kill him. He simply refuses to be destroyed by what his father sends at him. He takes the worst thing Ozai can offer, and he lets it pass through him, and he walks away. This is the deepest thing the show says about Zuko's relationship with his father. He does not win by defeating Ozai. He wins by not being destroyed by him, by receiving the full weight of everything his father could throw, literal lightning, and remaining standing, remaining himself. He walks out of the bunker alone and heads toward the Avatar. Part 8, Lightning and Redirection. There is so much philosophy compressed into the lightning redirection technique that it deserves its own section, because it is not just about Zuko and Ozai. It is about the most fundamental question of Zuko's entire journey. How do you deal with the bad things that have been done to you without becoming a bad thing yourself? Iroh's teaching on lightning redirection goes like this. Lightning comes from a place of singular focus, from a mind that has suppressed all internal conflict and channeled its fire into one pure, devastating strike. To try to match lightning with lightning is to try to meet singular force with singular force, which will either destroy you or leave you with nothing but the energy of destruction. But if you can receive it, create a path through your own body for it to travel, let it flow through you and out again, you can survive it and redirect it somewhere harmless. The physical mechanics of this, as Iroh teaches them, require absolute stillness at the center. You cannot redirect lightning if you are reactive. If you panic, if you resist, if you try to fight the current, it will tear you apart. You have to be, in the moment of receiving it, genuinely calm, genuinely present, genuinely accepting of what is happening while simultaneously choosing what to do with it. This is not passivity. There is nothing passive about standing in the path of lightning and choosing how to answer it. But it is the opposite of the Fire Nation's institutional approach to conflict, which is to overwhelm, to dominate, to meet force with more force until something breaks. Zuko cannot learn this technique easily. He struggles with it across the second season precisely because the internal stillness it requires is not something he can access. He is too knotted up with anger and grief and shame and longing to find the quiet center that redirecting lightning demands. He keeps trying to learn it and keeps failing, and the failure is always the same. He is too reactive. The part of him that wants to fight back, that is so used to fighting back, that has used aggression as armor for so long, that part will not be quiet enough to let the energy pass through. What changes ultimately is not his technique, it is his inner state. As the third season unfolds and Zuko begins to resolve his internal contradictions, begins to know more clearly who he is and what he actually believes, the stillness becomes accessible. He finds the center, and when Ozai fires lightning at him in the bunker, he is ready. The technique, applied in this moment, is the philosophy made physical. Ozai spent Zuko's entire life trying to shape him through force. Through the application of violent energy intended to produce a particular outcome, a son who was obedient and ruthless and empty of everything that made him inconvenient. Ozai has been shooting lightning at Zuko's soul since Zuko was old enough to feel it. And Zuko, for most of his life, has responded by trying to either absorb the impact or flee from it. In the bunker, he redirects it. He receives what his father sends, lets it move through him, and releases it. He does not destroy his father. He does not hurt him. He simply refuses to be shaped by him. He takes the force of Ozai's will and sends it into empty sky. This is what it looks like to be free of someone who has controlled you. Not victory over them, not destruction of them, not even complete escape from them. Because Zuko carries the memory of his father, and always will. But the ability to receive what they send without being made into what they intended, the ability to let the lightning pass through you and keep walking. The technique also serves as a model for how Zuko eventually relates to his entire history. He does not erase what happened to him. He does not pretend the burning did not occur, does not insist the scar means nothing, does not perform a kind of amnesia about the years of chasing and failing and betraying. He carries all of it. He brings it with him, but he redirects it. He takes the energy of everything that was done to him and channels it into something that does not cause destruction, into understanding, into compassion, into the particular kind of wisdom that only comes from having been genuinely lost and finding your way back. His uncle talks about the importance of fire as life. The show often emphasizes destruction when it comes to firebending, but Iroh is always pulling toward the other meaning. Fire is warmth. Fire is light. Fire is the thing that makes the hearth a home and the lantern a guide through darkness. It is both, always both. And which side of it you draw on depends on who you have chosen to be in the moment you are in. By the time Zuko joins Team Avatar, his fire is different. It is still powerful. It is still formidable in a fight. But the quality of it has changed in a way that the show depicts visually and orally. It is less a weapon being swung and more an element being worked with. Less aggression and more craft. The difference between someone using fire as a tool of anger and someone using fire because they genuinely understand what it is. Part 9. The confession scene and what it means. There is a moment in the second to last section of Season 3, after Zuko has joined Team Avatar and is traveling with Aang to learn from the Dragon Masters, where Zuko has a one-on-one conversation with each member of the team. The show gives him these individual scenes deliberately, understanding that trust is not a group phenomenon. Trust is built one person at a time, in the specific context of specific histories. The conversation with Katara is the hardest one, and the show knows it, and it does not flinch. Katara is the member of Team Avatar who has the most direct personal reason to distrust Zuko that goes beyond the general antagonism of the chase across 3 seasons. In Ba Sing Se, in the Crystal Catacombs, there was a moment where Zuko and Katara were imprisoned together, and for a few hours something genuine passed between them. Katara talked about her mother. Zuko talked about his. The walls came down. She offered him healing. She let herself see him as a person. And then he chose Azula. She cannot forgive him for this easily. She is not wrong to struggle with it. And the show does not pressure her to be fine faster than is real. When Zuko joins the group, Katara is cold to him in a way that is specific and pointed, not the general hostility of an enemy but the specific coldness of someone who extended trust and had it broken. The conversation they eventually have, where Zuko acknowledges explicitly that he knows what he did and that there is no defense for it, is one of the most mature pieces of writing in the series. He does not make excuses. He does not explain the psychological complexity of his situation in Ba Sing Se. He just says that she has no reason to forgive him, and that he would not blame her if she did not. He is not asking. He is simply acknowledging. And Katara, eventually, offers him something that is not quite forgiveness but is close to it. She tells him that she means it when she says that if he steps out of line, she will take him down herself. This is not a warm reconciliation. It is a conditional opening. But it is an opening. What this scene captures about Zuko's character at this stage of his journey is his willingness to be accountable without requiring absolution. This is one of the most difficult things a person who has done harm can do. The temptation, after making a significant wrong, is to seek forgiveness as though the receiving of it would complete something, close the loop, allow you to stop carrying the weight. Zuko does not do this. He carries the weight. He acknowledges it without trying to put it down before the person he wronged is ready. He waits. And in the waiting, he demonstrates exactly the kind of patience and genuine respect for someone else's process that makes him trustworthy in a way that his apology alone never could. The larger confession, the one that reverberates most powerfully, is the one he delivers to his father, in the underground bunker, alone with a man who is the most powerful person in the Fire Nation and who has tried, in every way that power can try, to make Zuko into something he is not. He says everything. He says what he thinks about the war. He says what he thinks about the Fire Nation's history, about the lie of greatness that they were all taught to believe. He says he knows his uncle has gotten to him, and he says it with a smile, because he is proud of it. He says that what the world needs now, what the Fire Nation needs, is not power. It is an era of peace and kindness to replace the era of fear. Ozai laughs. He asks if Zuko realizes what he is saying. Zuko says yes. The steadiness of this scene is its most important quality. There is no dramatic shaking, no crying, no crisis of nerve. He is simply clear. He came here to tell the truth, and he is telling it, and not one part of him is going to stop him. The boy who knelt on the floor of the Agni Kai chamber and begged for mercy is still in there somewhere, but he is not the one running things anymore. The person running things now is someone who has made his choices and is standing behind them and does not need his father's blessing to keep standing. This is what the show means by honor. Not the word Zuko chanted in the first season like a ritual incantation against uncertainty, but this clarity, this willingness to do the right thing in the presence of the person whose disapproval used to be the thing he feared most in the world. He does not fight his father in the bunker because he does not want to fight his father. Because fighting his father has never been the point. The point was never domination. The point was always something simpler and more radical than that. The point was to be free. To be himself, to stop performing for an audience of one, and to stop measuring his worth by a standard that was designed to keep him falling short. He walks out of that bunker free, not in the sense that nothing more will happen, that there are no more challenges, no more grief, no more cost, but free in the specific sense that matters most. He is no longer living inside his father's story about him. He has written his own, in the underground, and he is walking toward it. Part 10. What Zuko teaches us. And now we come to the last part of this. The part that is not about the show at all, not really, or is about it only in the way that good stories are always about something that extends beyond their frame. Zuko's story is not a fantasy. The specifics are, obviously, the fire, the bending, the 100-Year War, the Avatar. These are the elements of a particular world, a world built with extraordinary care and detail and love. But the philosophical engine underneath it, the thing that makes his story feel true in the way that the best stories feel true, is completely and entirely of this world. Every one of us has something we were taught to believe about ourselves that is not true. A version of our own worth that was handed to us by someone who either could not or would not see us clearly. A wound wearing a mask of something else, anger or ambition or perfectionism or constant restless movement, because the wound itself is too exposed to look at directly. Every one of us has heard some version of the message Ozai sent Zuko, that we are not enough as we are, that the way we are built is insufficient. That love has to be earned through performance, that belonging is conditional, that the parts of us that are soft and feeling and unable to fight our own fathers are weaknesses to be burned out rather than qualities to be protected. And most of us have responded the way Zuko responded. We have armored up. We have found our version of the mission, our version of the chase. The thing we can pursue that makes the pain feel purposeful, that gives the hurt a story that sounds like motivation rather than grief. The thing the show says about this, through 3 seasons and 61 episodes and one of the most carefully constructed character arcs in the history of animation, is this. That armor is not survival. It is delay. You can wear the armor for a long time. You can wear it so long that you forget it is there. You can organize your entire life around maintaining it, can chase every honor and title and achievement and approval that the world has on offer, and you can arrive at all of them and find that the thing you needed was not there waiting. Because the thing you needed was not external. What Zuko needed was not the crown, not the Fire Lord's approval, not the scar healed or the banishment reversed or any of the external circumstances that occupied so much of his energy. What he needed was to know that he was worth something exactly as he was. The boy who could not bring himself to fight his father. The boy who spoke out in the war room because he could not watch soldiers be sacrificed without saying something. That boy, as he was. Worth something. Worth everything. He needed someone to tell him, and to mean it, and to keep meaning it regardless of what he did or failed to do. Iroh told him. Again and again and again. In the language of tea and jokes and patient presence and unconditional love that never withdrew itself no matter what Zuko did to push it away. Iroh told him, and Zuko spent most of the show unable to fully receive it, and then eventually he could, and the moment he could, everything else began to change. This is not a story about willpower. It is not about deciding to be better and executing that decision cleanly. It is about the specific miracle of being loved well enough for long enough that the armor becomes bearable to set down. About having someone who sees the best version of you and holds that vision steady even when you cannot see it yourself, who is still there when you finally look up and need to borrow their eyes for a moment. Iroh is the person who held that vision, and the vision was simple. Not that Zuko would become powerful or honorable in the way his nation defined honor, or successful in the terms that the Fire Nation valued. The vision was just that Zuko would become himself, fully and finally himself. The show is also doing something philosophically specific about the relationship between identity and time. Zuko, at 13, at the War Council, was already himself. He was already the person who would eventually teach Aang firebending and become Fire Lord and try to repair the damage his nation had done to the world. That person was always in there, but the path from that original self to the recovered self required passing through everything the intervening years put in the way. This is not a unique situation. It is the situation of every person who has ever spent years being someone they were not and then had to find their way back. The self that was always there does not disappear. It waits, patient as water under ice, waiting for the thaw. The thaw comes differently for everyone. For Zuko, it came through Iroh's love and the compounding evidence of his own emptiness and the particular clarity that arrived, eventually, when he had nowhere left to go except toward the truth. But the mechanism is always some version of the same thing. Something becomes intolerable. The armor becomes heavier than the wound it was built to protect. The cost of continuing to be the wrong person exceeds the cost of becoming the right one. And then you choose. Not once. not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small choices, each one slightly more honest than the last, each one slightly more aligned with who you actually are, until the direction of travel has changed and you are moving, slowly but unmistakably, somewhere new. There is something else the show says that is easy to miss, because it is embedded in the structure of the story rather than in any particular line of dialogue. The show says that the people you hurt on your way to becoming yourself do not owe you forgiveness, that earning their trust back is a different and slower process than changing yourself, and that the change in you is not a transaction that entitles you to anything from anyone else. Zuko changes, and the change is real, and the change does not erase what he did. Both things are true simultaneously. The show holds them both. This is philosophically mature in a way that most stories about redemption are not. Most redemption narratives want the arc to end in reconciliation, want the change in the redeemed character to produce reconciliation with the people they wronged as a kind of natural consequence, a reward for the work of becoming better. Zuko's story is more honest than this. He has to earn each individual relationship back through time and consistency and the absence of expectation. He does not get to feel entitled to forgiveness just because he has done the inner work. The inner work is for him. The relationships are separate. He earns them anyway, slowly, one at a time, in conversations that are specific and hard and require him to stay present with other people's pain without trying to manage it for his own comfort. And watching him do this, watching this character who was once incapable of sitting still with anything uncomfortable learn to hold someone else's discomfort with genuine care, is one of the most quietly extraordinary things the show does. The final image of Zuko in the series is not a triumph. It is a person standing in the world he has chosen, facing the work of rebuilding what was broken, knowing the work is enormous and that much of it will be his to carry because of what his family did and what he himself did before he knew better. He does not look relieved. He does not look light. He looks like someone who has finally arrived at the place where they can begin to do what actually matters. That is not a minor thing. That is, in many ways, the only thing. The show started with a boy in a room on fire. It ends with a man who chose not to be defined by the fire, who learned that you can receive the worst thing someone sends at you, let it run through you, and release it back into the sky without it becoming you, who learned that the best part of yourself, the part that spoke up in the war room and could not fight his own father, and asked Aang through a mask whether they might have been friends, was always the right part, was always the part worth protecting. He was right the first time. Before the burning, before the banishment, before the scar and the armor and the years of chasing the wrong thing. He was right when he said those soldiers should not be sacrificed. He was right when he knelt on the floor. He was right when he could not make himself fight his father even with an entire room watching. The world punished him for being right, and he spent years trying to become someone the world would not punish. And eventually he came back to the place he started from, older and scarred and carrying the full weight of everything he had done wrong. And he found the boy who was right there, found him still standing, still true, and he chose him. Closing. 100 years ago, in the context of this show, a boy was put in a room on fire, and the story of what happens to him afterward, across 3 seasons and one of the most carefully constructed character journeys in the history of animated television, is a story about what all of us do with the fires that were set for us, the ones we did not choose, the ones that marked us. Zuko's answer, slow and painful and far from clean, is that you carry them. You carry the mark and the memory and the anger and the grief and all of it. You carry it without letting it tell you who you are. You receive what was done to you without passing it on. You find, if you are lucky, someone who holds a different vision of you steady enough and long enough that you can eventually borrow their eyes. And then, when you are ready, when the inner work is done enough and the direction of travel has changed enough, you walk into the room where the fire is and you speak your truth. Not for them. Not for approval, not even for resolution, just because it is true. And you are, finally, someone who can stand behind a true thing. That is the philosophy of Zuko. That is what 3 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender are actually about. And if you watched it as a child and you are watching now and something in it felt like it was written for you, it was. Not because the creators knew you specifically, but because they wrote it with enough honesty and enough care and enough genuine understanding of what it means to be a person trying to become themselves, that there is something in it for everyone who has ever been in a room that someone else set on fire. Let it carry you tonight. Let the weight go. The fire has always been warmer than it first appeared. If this found you somewhere quiet, drop a comment. If it is the first video of mine you have seen, subscribing costs nothing and means these keep coming. And if you know someone who needed to hear about a boy with a scar and a long way home, this video will be here when they are ready. Rest well. End of script. Extended reflection, Zuko alone and the philosophy of being seen. There is one episode in the second season that deserves its own extended meditation, because it is, in many ways, the philosophical center of the entire series. Not the most dramatic episode, not the most action-heavy, not the one with the most obvious forward momentum in terms of plot. The episode is called Zuko Alone, and it is, almost uniquely in the show, an episode in which Aang does not appear at all. This is Zuko's show for 45 minutes, and it belongs only to him. Written by Elizabeth Welch and directed by Lauren McMullen, the episode aired on the 12th of May, 2006, and it is structured around two parallel stories unfolding simultaneously. In the present, Zuko is wandering through a drought-parched stretch of the Earth Kingdom, without money, without food, without Iroh, without any of the armor that his prince's life had always provided. He is gaunt. He is tired. He is at a level of ordinary human desperation that the show has not shown him at before. He almost takes food from a pregnant woman on the road because he is that hungry. He cannot bring himself to do it, which tells you something, but the fact that he considered it tells you how low he has fallen. He drifts into a village, a small, dried-out settlement that has the visual and narrative feel of a classic Western, deliberately and with affection. The episode borrows from the structure of the wandering stranger archetype, the gunslinger who rides into a troubled town, helps the people there, and then rides out again. The show is drawing consciously from the Western film Shane, which follows almost exactly this structure. A man of violence with a mysterious past comes to a place that needs protecting. He does the thing that needs to be done, and then he leaves. Because the violence that made him useful in that moment also makes him someone who cannot stay. Zuko falls into this role not through any grand decision, but through proximity. A boy named Lee throws something at some Earth Kingdom soldiers who are bullying the village, and the soldiers come for him, and Zuko steps between them. Not because he had a plan, not because he calculated the benefit, just because he could not watch it happen and do nothing. Sound familiar? He stays with Lee's family for a few days. He helps with the barn roof. He eats dinner with them. He teaches Lee to fight. He is, for these quiet days, just a person among other people, visible only as what he is in the moment, rather than as the accumulated weight of his history. The village does not know he is Fire Nation. They do not know he is a prince. They see a scarred young man with unusual fighting skills who stepped up when someone needed him to. And the flashbacks that run alongside this present-day story show you who Zuko was before all of it. Before the scar. When he was a small boy in the palace, a boy who had a mother who loved him and a sister who was already something frightening and an uncle who was still the dragon of the West. The flashbacks are gentle and devastating simultaneously. They show you the warmth that was there. The small moments of genuine family that existed before Ozai's coldness froze everything. They show you the early emergence of Azula as a creature of her father's making, burning an Earth Kingdom doll while Zuko kept his. Watching her brother with something that is part calculation and part envy, and part the baseline cruelty of a child who has been taught that power is the only real language. The dagger matters. Iroh sends Zuko a dagger from the siege of Ba Sing Se when Zuko is small, and the inscription on one side reads, in the show's translated text, "Never give up." This is the dagger Zuko gives to Lee at the end of his time in the village. He passes on the thing his uncle gave him, the object that carries the message that has sustained him through every impossible circumstance, and he gives it to a boy who needs it more than he does right now. But the episode does not end with warmth. It ends with what might be the cruelest moment in the entire series, and the cruelty is not anyone's fault. The village soldiers take Lee captive. Zuko has no choice but to reveal what he is. He uses firebending to win the fight, and in the aftermath, standing in the street with the soldiers unconscious around him, he tells the village who he is. My name is Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai, prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne. And Lee, the boy whose trust he earned, the boy he taught to hold a weapon, turns on him, says he hates him, will not take the dagger back. And the village, which was cheering 30 seconds ago, watches him with the specific cold hostility reserved for an enemy when the enemy turns out to have been among you all along. Zuko rides away, down a dusty road toward a burning sunset. The last shot of him shows his face in profile, the scarred side facing the camera, and there is an expression there that the show has never shown on him before. It is not anger. It is not grief in the sharp burning way. It is something quieter and more hopeless. He helped them. He was good to them. He did the right thing. He gave them the dagger that says never give up, and they looked at his face and saw only what his country had done to theirs. The philosophical weight of this ending is enormous. The show is asking a very hard question, one that does not have a clean answer. What do you do when the wrong you carry is not only your own? When the harm done in the name of your identity, your nation, your family, is so pervasive and so real that your individual goodness cannot be separated from the collective guilt? When Lee's hatred of Zuko is completely understandable given everything the Fire Nation has taken from his family and his village and his world? The show does not answer this with resolution. It simply shows it to you. Both things are true at once. Zuko was genuinely good to Lee and his family. Lee's rejection of him is genuinely justified. These truths do not cancel each other out. They simply coexist in the same dusty frame, and you have to sit with that. This is what the episode contributes to the philosophy of Zuko that most other episodes do not. It shows you that his redemption is not just a personal journey. It is also a communal one that extends beyond his own internal transformation into the much harder work of what it means to be held accountable for things larger than yourself. He cannot just become a good person in isolation. He has to become a good person in the context of a legacy of harm that his family and his nation created, and that redemption, if it comes at all, will require not just his changed self, but his changed actions in the world over time. Extended reflection: Azula as the mirror. You cannot fully understand Zuko without understanding Azula, not because she is his opposite in a simple good versus evil sense, but because she is his mirror in a much more complicated and disturbing way. She is what Zuko might have been had Ozai succeeded completely. Azula is introduced in the second season and immediately establishes herself as one of the most formidable and frightening characters in the show. She is a prodigy. Her blue fire, which burns hotter and more precisely than any other firebenders, is not just a visual distinction. It is the show telling you that she has achieved something technically extraordinary. She is, on the purely technical level, the best firebender in the world of her generation. She is also, beneath the composure and the tactical brilliance, deeply and profoundly broken in ways that are different from Zuko's breaking but no less complete. What the show does with Azula is something that deserves sustained attention, because it refuses to make her simply evil. It shows you, in flashbacks and in the careful construction of her interactions, a child who was as shaped by Ozai's parenting as Zuko was, just in the opposite direction. Where Ozai's cruelty broke Zuko toward the outside, created external wounds that were visible in public, Ozai's favoritism of Azula broke her toward the inside, created something that looks on the surface like perfect confidence, and is in fact a complete absence of a self that is not dependent on performance. Azula learned from her father that she was special, that she was different, that the rules applying to other people, the obligations of care and empathy and genuine connection, did not apply to her. She learned that people were instruments. She learned that the only real language was power. And she absorbed these lessons so completely, was so extraordinarily good at enacting them, that she became her father's perfect student. But here is what the show understands about this that most portrayals of similar characters miss. The absence of genuine connection is not strength. It is a different kind of wound. Azula is surrounded by people who fear and obey her. She has no one who actually loves her, not even her father, who uses her the same way he would use any excellent weapon, without tenderness and without genuine regard for what the weapon needs to remain intact. Not her friends, Mai and Ty Lee, who are loyal out of a combination of genuine feeling and genuine fear, and who will eventually choose themselves over Azula's demands when the pressure gets high enough. In the show's final stretch, Azula begins to fall apart. Not slowly, catastrophically. The composure that was always so absolute begins to crack, and what comes through is not hidden warmth or suppressed compassion. What comes through is terror. The deepest, most fundamental terror of a person who has organized her entire sense of worth around being exceptional, around being necessary to people who hold power, and who is confronted with the people she depends on choosing to leave. Her breakdown in the finale is devastating to watch, not because it is satisfying, but because it is genuinely sad. The blue fire of her Agni Kai with Zuko flickers between blue and orange, between her signature precise color and the ordinary uncontrolled orange of emotionally dysregulated firebending. Her control, which has always been absolute, disintegrates. She is screaming and crying, and her fire is doing what her fire has never done before, which is reflecting her inner state rather than transcending it. Azula's disintegration is the show's way of demonstrating, from the other direction, the same truth it demonstrates through Zuko from the inside. That a life organized around performance, around the maintenance of a particular external image, around the suppression of everything vulnerable and real, is not a life of strength. It is a life of constant, exhausting maintenance. And when the maintenance becomes too much, when the cracks form, the whole structure goes with it. Where Zuko's path was to find his way back to the genuine self that was always there, Azula's tragedy is that she may not have a genuine self to find her way back to. Ozai's project with her was more complete, the shaping more thorough, the suppression of anything inconvenient more total. She was taught from the very beginning that what she was naturally, imperfectly, humanly, was something to be perfected into something else. And she was so talented and so determined that she succeeded. She became the perfect instrument she was shaped to be. And then the world stopped rewarding the performance, and there was nothing left underneath. This parallel is not accidental. The show builds these two characters as responses to the same formative pressure. Same father, same dynamic of conditional love based on performance, same Fire Nation context. But different outcomes based on what each child was taught to suppress. Zuko was told his compassion was weakness and spent years trying to convince himself it was gone. Azula was told her vulnerability was unnecessary and spent years building a world in which vulnerability was never required. The first path leads to someone who still has access to his best self even when he cannot acknowledge it. The second path leads to someone who may have genuinely lost access to a self that was never allowed to exist. Zuko had Iroh. This is, the show quietly suggests, the difference between them, not innate goodness. Not some fundamental difference in their natures that made one capable of redemption and the other not, just the presence or absence of someone who loved them in a way that refused to be conditional. Iroh tried with Azula. There is a moment in the third season flashbacks where you see him as a younger man with both children, and the warmth he extends toward Azula is the same warmth he extends toward Zuko. She does not know what to do with it. It does not fit any of the categories her father gave her for understanding relationships. She files it somewhere confusing and moves on. But Zuko knew, even when he could not receive it, even when he was pushing Iroh away, he knew. And that knowing, however unconscious, however deeply buried under layers of armor and anger and conditioned performance, was the thread he eventually followed home. Extended reflection on firebending and the nature of change. Let us spend some time with fire itself, because the show is doing something philosophically serious with fire as an element and as a metaphor, and Zuko is its most sustained vehicle. Fire, in the elemental philosophy of Avatar, is the most dangerous of the four elements and also, in Iroh's teaching, the one most deeply misunderstood. The other nations teach their children that fire is destruction. The Earth Kingdom's fear of Fire Nation aggression is inseparable from fire as a literal weapon. The Water Tribes have their own relationship with it. A pragmatic tool users respect mixed with wariness, the understanding of something that can help you survive the cold and also consume everything you love. The air nomads, in the show's cosmology, are associated with the element most philosophically opposite to fire, with detachment and flow and the kind of freedom that comes from holding nothing too tightly. But fire, in the hands of its most thoughtful practitioners, is something else entirely. Iroh teaches this directly in the third season, when he is helping Zuko understand why his firebending has stopped working after the period of doubt and internal conflict that followed his return to the Fire Nation. He tells Zuko that before the Fire Nation started the war, fire was not taught as something aggressive. It was taught as something that comes from a place of life, from the inner warmth and vitality and drive that animates all living things. Fire is energy. Fire is passion. Fire is the force that cooks the food and warms the house and lights the lamp in the dark. It is not inherently destructive any more than wind is inherently violent or water is inherently cold. The Fire Nation, in pursuing its imperial project, corrupted its own element. taught its benders to draw on aggression and conquest and the desire to overwhelm, rather than on the genuine warmth and vitality that are fire's true source. And this corruption is visible in the way Fire Nation soldiers bend, in the way Ozai bends, in the way even the early Zuko bends. It is impressive in its power and empty in its quality. Zuko's crisis in the third season, the moment when his fire simply will not come as it should, is a physical manifestation of this philosophical emptiness. He has made his choices and come back to the Fire Nation and resumed his role and resumed his performance, and his fire has nothing real to draw on, because the anger that was always his fuel has been displaced by something more complicated and harder to weaponize. Something that is closer to grief and guilt and genuine confusion about who he is. The solution Iroh finds for him is to go to the Sun Warriors. The original firebenders, in the Avatar world, were not humans. They were dragons. Ran and Shaw, the last two great dragons of the world, guard the secrets of firebending's original purpose in an ancient temple complex, and what they show Zuko and Aang when they perform their fire dance is not what either of them expected. They expected destruction. They expected fire as the Fire Nation taught it, overwhelming and singular. What they see instead is a display of every color in fire's spectrum. Every hue that flame can make, warm reds and deep purples and pale yellows and cool blues, all present at once, all part of the same thing, all aspects of a single element shown in its wholeness, rather than in any single reduced expression of it. The dragons show them fire as life, fire as all the things it is when it is not being used as a weapon or a tool of conquest. Zuko is moved in a way the show does not need to describe. It is visible in his face. He is seeing his element clearly for the first time. He is seeing what he has been wielding his entire life in its true and complete form, rather than in the narrowed, corrupted form his nation taught him. He is understanding, in his body in a way that bypasses intellect entirely, that the thing he has been using to fight and threaten and drive away everything that threatens him is also the thing that can illuminate and warm and sustain. That it was never meant to be only what he made it. And then his fire comes back. Not the aggressive, explosive fire of the first season. Something steadier and more complex and more true. Something with more range in it. This is the show's most physical depiction of what inner transformation actually changes. Not circumstances. Not the external facts of Zuko's life, but the relationship between himself and the fundamental force he carries. When he is performing, when he is living in the wrong story, his fire serves the performance. When he is genuinely himself, when he has found the internal stillness that the lightning redirection technique requires, and the Fire Master's dance demonstrates, his fire serves something else. Something that was always fire's real purpose before anyone decided to use it to hurt people. Extended reflection. What Ursa left behind. No account of Zuko's psychology is complete without acknowledging the person whose absence shaped him almost as much as his father's presence did. His mother, Ursa. Ursa is barely in the show in terms of screen time, but her presence is everywhere in its margins. She is visible in flashbacks as a gentle and perceptive woman who clearly loved Zuko deeply and who saw in him what Ozai could not or would not. She called him her little turtle duck, a term of endearment that becomes, in the show's careful construction, a shorthand for the version of himself that he has spent the series trying to find his way back to. In one of the most tender flashbacks in the series, young Zuko sits beside the palace pond and watches a mother turtle duck fend off another that comes too close to her ducklings. He tells his mother he thinks it is amazing how the mother protects her babies. Ursa kneels beside him and says that a mother's love is the most powerful force in the world. And this small scene, played in a palace garden between a gentle woman and her small son, becomes the ghost that haunts every subsequent scene in which Zuko is trying to make sense of his father's cruelty. He knows what love looks like. He saw it in this garden. He felt it from this woman, and then she was gone. Ursa's disappearance is deliberate, and the full story of it is held back across the series in the way that real loss often withholds complete information. She is gone, but where and why is only partially revealed in the Day of Black Sun scene, where Ozai tells Zuko that his mother committed treason to save his life, that she was banished for it, that she might still be alive somewhere. Zuko, hearing this, asks whether she is alive. Ozai says perhaps, with a casualness that is specifically designed to wound. Perhaps. Not yes, not no. Just the withholding of the answer that would mean everything to a son who has not stopped wondering. What Ursa's absence does to Zuko is create a particular kind of grief that the show depicts honestly. It is not simple sadness. It is the grief of someone who lost the person who saw them most clearly, who held the truest and kindest version of who they were, and who has spent years in a world that reflects back only the corrupted version. Ozai's version, the Fire Nation's version. Every time Zuko draws on something genuinely tender in himself, something patient, or protective, or quietly caring, the show is implicitly referencing Ursa. The capacity for that tenderness came from somewhere, from someone who modeled it for him before the world decided it was a liability, and the fact that he retained it at all, buried as it was under years of conditioning and grief and the protective armor of rage, is the show's quiet testament to what good early love can do. It can survive a very long time underground, patient as water under ice, waiting for the thaw. Extended reflection. The Order of the White Lotus, and what wisdom looks like among the old. When the Order of the White Lotus reveals itself in the series finale, gathering at the walls of Ba Sing Se to retake the city, it is a moment of enormous satisfaction for anyone who has been paying careful attention. The game tiles. The White Lotus Gambit. The old men sitting in the backgrounds of scenes across 3 seasons, apparently unrelated, now revealed as a network of some of the wisest people in the world, united by the conviction that knowledge belongs to no single nation. The order includes Iroh, and also Pakku, the Northern Water Tribe Master, Bumi, the ancient and strange king of Omashu, Zhang, the deserting Fire Nation general, and Piandao, the Sword Master. 5 people from different nations, different elements, different disciplines, united by the belief that the world's survival required the kind of cooperation that the war had made formally impossible. What is philosophically interesting about the Order is what it says about how wisdom is actually built. Every member has arrived at their position through a particular kind of earned disillusionment. Iroh through the death of his son and the recognition that the Fire Nation's imperial project was wrong. Pakku through a decades-long evolution from rigid traditionalism toward genuine openness. Bumi through 100 years of watching and waiting and apparently doing nothing, which turns out to have been something very precise and strategically exact. Zhang through the experience of being a firebender who understood, in a way his nation refused to understand, what fire could destroy and why that destruction was not something to celebrate. None of them are wise because they were born that way. They are wise because they paid a price for the understanding they carry, because they allowed reality to change them, because they did not retreat into the comfort of the ideology they were raised in when that ideology turned out to be demonstrably wrong. This is what wisdom actually requires. Not intelligence, though all of them are intelligent, not talent, but the willingness to be changed by what you encounter. The willingness to let your wrong beliefs be corrected by reality rather than protecting those beliefs against evidence. The willingness to say I was wrong, not once in some dramatic moment of public conversion, but quietly and privately in the ongoing relationship between yourself and what you observe about the world. Zuko O'Reilly put this willingness. He is changed by everything he encounters. By Iroh's patience, by Aang's offer of friendship in a forest at night, by the emptiness of the palace, by Lee's rejection, by the lightning his father fired at him. He lets these things cost him something. He does not close against them. He absorbs the revision and carries it forward. And in this ongoing openness to being changed, he earns a version of wisdom that his father, for all his extraordinary power, never had access to. Ozai is many things, but he is not capable of being changed. He is intelligent and formidable, and absolutely committed to the version of reality he constructed around himself. But wisdom requires permeability. It requires the willingness to let the world show you something you had not expected to see, and Ozai sealed himself against that possibility a very long time ago. He looks at Zuko's inability to fight him and sees weakness. He looks at Zuko's eventual defiance and sees betrayal. He looks at the love Ursa showed their son and sees treason. He cannot see what is actually there because he has never allowed the world to show him anything he did not already decide was true. This incapacity is, the show argues, the deepest poverty. You can have everything the world offers in terms of power and position. You can be the most feared person alive, and if you cannot be changed by the people and events and truths that encounter you, you are poor in the only way that finally matters. Zuko ends the series in a position of formal authority comparable to his father's. He becomes Fire Lord. He inherits the same title, the same official power, the same position at the apex of the world's most powerful nation. But he enters that role as someone who has been thoroughly broken open by experience, who has been wrong in every way it is possible to be wrong, and has learned from each wrongness, who carries the full weight of his own history and his nation's history without either defending it or being crushed beneath it. He is going to be different from his father, not because he decided to be or because he is by nature more virtuous, but because he allowed himself to be changed, because he was taught to redirect the lightning, because he watched his uncle make tea in prison with the same care he would have brought to any other occasion, because a boy in an Earth Kingdom village handed a knife back to him and said he hated him, and Zuko carried that truth with him instead of burning it. He became capable of wisdom because he let the world cost him something, and the thing it cost him was everything he thought he knew about who he was, and in losing that, he found himself, the real self, the one that was always there, the one that spoke up in the war room at 13 years old because it simply could not watch others suffer without saying something. That boy became Fire Lord. Not the boy his father tried to make, the original one, the one who was right from the beginning. Final extended reflection on the night this story ends. It is late wherever you are. The room is quiet. The sounds of the day have settled down into whatever the night sounds like in your particular corner of the world. And you are here, with this story, with this boy and his uncle and his fire, and the long road he walked from a burning room to a place that finally felt like home. There is something about listening to a story like this in the dark that is different from watching it in the light. In the dark, the analytical distance softens. The intellectual frame goes quiet. And what you are left with is just the emotional truth of it. Just the clean, simple, human fact of a person who was hurt, and who spent years hurting others from the overflow of that hurt, and who eventually, slowly, painfully, found his way back to something truer. Most of us know this shape. Not from animated television, or not only from that, from our own lives or from the lives of people we love, or from the private landscape of our own interior where there are rooms we built to house the things we could not look at directly and doors we have not yet been quite ready to open. The show's great gift to everyone who has ever watched it is not the world-building, extraordinary as it is, not the martial arts philosophy or the lunar cycle tracked faithfully across the first season or the calligraphy that nobody told you to notice. The great gift is this: the stubborn, patient, unsentimental insistence that a person who has been shaped by damage can choose to be shaped differently, that the shaping is not finished until you decide it is, that the worst thing you have ever done is not the last word on who you are. Zuko was burned and told that the burning was his fault. He was banished and told that the banishment was his destiny. He was told in every way that power can tell a person something, that he was insufficient, that his softness and his feeling and his inability to raise fire against his own father were liabilities that needed to be corrected. He believed it for a very long time. And then, slowly, he stopped. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Not in a single speech or a single decisive moment where the old self fell away and the new one stepped forward complete and clean. It happened the way most real change happens, which is gradually and messily, and with genuine setbacks and moments where the armor went back on because the vulnerability became too much. But underneath all of it, underneath every step backward and every terrible choice and every moment of hollow emptiness in the palace after he finally got what he thought he had always wanted, the direction was always there. The compass needle of his truest self, pointing quietly and persistently in the direction it had always pointed. He followed it home. It took 3 years of the show's timeline. It took a war and a betrayal and a father's lightning, and his uncle's tea and a mask in the night, and a village that rejected him, and a cave full of green crystals, where he made the worst choice of his life, and the slow, unbearable emptiness that followed the worst choice. It took all of it, every single piece, and then he was home, not in the palace, not in any building or any title, in himself, in the place where the boy from the War Council had always been waiting, patient as water under ice, ready to finally be allowed to live. That is the story. That is the philosophy. That is what all those hours of meticulous, loving, obsessive animation work were building toward. A boy in a room on fire, and the long, winding, entirely human path by which he found his way out. Sleep well, wherever you are tonight. And if you made it all the way here, if you followed this whole road from that first burning room to this quiet ending, I want to know about it. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are in the world and what time it is and what brought you here tonight. Every comment is a reminder that this is a conversation, not a monologue. And if these long, slow journeys through the shows and the characters that have shaped how we understand the world are what you come here for, subscribing keeps them coming. These take a long time to make. They are made for exactly this, for the quiet hours, for the nights when you want something to settle into. Every subscriber is a reason to keep making them. Rest now. You have been on a long journey. You deserve the rest.